All right, ready to dive into some serious communication gold. We're cracking open Communicating for a Change by Andy Stanley.
It's become a go-to resource,
Yeah.
for everyone from, surprisingly, comedians like Jeff Foxworthy to, well, really anyone who wants their message to resonate.
Yeah, and what I love is it's not just theory. Stanley brings it to life with stories and examples like that scene from The Patriot. That one really stuck with me.
It's funny you mention that example because it really highlights that trap so many of us fall into, even when we're pretty experienced.
Hmm.
We focus so much on getting the information out there that we forget about the audience on the other side of it all.
It's so easy to get caught up in what you're saying, you forget someone else is supposed to be listening and understanding.
Totally. Like Stanley says, we need to shift from a performance mindset to a connection mindset. Like think of an actor. Their goal isn't to just perfectly recite lines. It's to embody the character and connect
Have you ever been in that situation where you're sitting through a presentation and you just want to be like, what is the point?
all the time. And that's exactly what Stanley tackles with his power of one principle.
Hmm.
He makes a really strong case for ditching those multi-point presentations and instead just focusing on one single impactful idea.
I feel that. How many times have we walked out of a talk just overwhelmed with information but not able to remember a single takeaway?
Exactly. It's about leaving your audience with something they can grasp, remember, and actually put into practice. A great example of this is when he talks about his colleague Lane Jones. Jones boiled down a whole talk on nurturing romance to this one powerful statement: you are the only legitimate source of romance in your spouse's life.
Now that you mention it, I do remember that line. And it really makes you think, how can I boil down my message to that one potent statement?
Right. And that leads us to another essential point. Presentation matters. It's like going to a fancy restaurant. Of course, the quality of the food matters, but the presentation just elevates the entire experience.
100%. It's like the difference between reading a recipe and experiencing a beautifully plated dish.
Exactly. How we present information is as crucial as the information itself. He even tells this story about a staff member who presented the same Bible story to kids in 3 completely different ways.
Okay, now you have to tell me. What were the 3 ways?
She acted it out, then presented it silent film style, and then, get this, as an opera.
Wow, that's thinking outside the box. But did it actually work?
It did. The kids were completely engaged, but most importantly, they understood and remembered the message.
That's amazing. It makes me think about what Stanley says about engaging with the text itself, too, whether it's scripture or any important material. He's all about bringing it to life, not just reading it or over-explaining.
Totally. He talks about things like highlighting odd words, voicing your own questions or frustrations, even using visuals. Imagine giving a presentation on David and Goliath and whipping out a slingshot.
Now that's memorable. It's about creating an experience for the audience. So we've talked about the power of one, the importance of presentation. What other communication gems does Stanley have for us?
Well, this is where it gets even more interesting. He talks about the power of creating tension.
Tension, as in like making your audience feel uncomfortable?
Not quite. Remember that MRI story he tells? He connects it to the power of unanswered questions and unresolved tension. That's how you capture an audience's attention.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So instead of just giving the information, you set up a question or a problem that makes people want to know more.
Exactly. He challenges us to ask ourselves, what question am I answering? What tension will this message resolve? Think about how Jesus did this. Who do people say that I am? Instant engagement.
Wow, that's such a good example. And that applies to any communication, right? Formal presentations, even just telling a story. You need to pique people's curiosity and make them want to know what happens next. How do we do that effectively?
Well, he suggests a few techniques for doing just that, and we're going to dive into those right after a quick break.
All right, so before the break, we were talking about creating tension to keep your audience hooked. So are we talking like dramatic pauses or what?
Well, one surprisingly simple thing Stanley highlights is actually about checking your speed.
Really? I would have thought speaking quickly, like to build that excitement, would be the way to go.
It's more about pacing than just like pure speed.
Hmm.
See, our brains actually process words way faster than we speak. So if we talk too slowly, minds start to wander.
Yeah, like when you're watching a movie and the dialogue just drags and you find yourself reaching for your phone.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But here's the thing. Speaking a bit faster than a normal conversation can actually make you sound more authoritative and persuasive. It's about finding that sweet spot.
Interesting. So not rushing, but keeping the energy up and people tuned in What else can we do to build that captivating flow?
Another key technique, using clear transitions. And I'm not just talking about, saying moving on or the next point is.
I was just going to ask about that. Like, there's got to be something more engaging, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Stanley challenges us to think deeper about how each part of our message connects to the next. It's like almost like weaving a story, creating a sense of flow and anticipation.
So it's the difference between just listing points and crafting a narrative that pulls people along.
Yes. And to help with this, he introduces this framework I really like for structuring your message. Me, we, God, you, we.
Okay, that's catchy. Break that down for me. What's the me, we, God, you, we all about?
Think of it as a roadmap, right? It helps you connect with your audience on a personal level and guides them toward action. So it starts with IMI. You share a personal story, maybe a struggle you've had that relates to the topic.
You're making yourself vulnerable, relatable from the start.
Exactly. Then you move to WE, expanding the focus to shared experiences. This helps your audience feel understood, connected to you and what you're saying.
Okay, so you're building a bridge from your own experience to a shared one. Love it. And then God steps in.
You got it. This is where you bring in your core message. Yeah. Right? Whether it's from the Bible, a principle, a key idea. But the important thing is you introduce it in a way that directly addresses that shared experience you've been building.
Instead of just presenting information, you're showing how it applies to real life, to the stuff you're already discussing.
Exactly. And from there, we move to you. This is where you, as the speaker, offer a specific action the listener can take based on that core message.
This is how you bridge that gap between just knowing something and actually doing it right. It's not just be more grateful, it's here's how you can be more grateful.
Right. And finally, you end with WE again, broadening the perspective again to consider what happens if we all apply this idea together. It creates a sense of possibility.
I love how this framework isn't just about delivering information. It's about actually making a change. It's practical and inspiring. Speaking of practical, Stanley talks a lot about application, right? What are some of his thoughts on that?
One thing he emphasizes is that people really struggle to apply general principles. Think about it. If you tell someone, just be more generous, it's too vague, right? They need something concrete.
So instead of be more grateful, you might say, write a thank you note to someone who's made a difference in your life.
Perfect example. The more specific the action, the more likely people are to actually do it. And don't underestimate the power of repetition.
Okay, that makes sense.
Wow.
But how does repetition fit into this?
Think about those catchy jingles that get stuck in your head, right? Repetition makes things stick. Stanley encourages us to repeat our main point and what we want people to do about it throughout the message.
So it's not just about saying it once, it's about reinforcing it. Now, when it comes to the content itself, say you're referencing a text, Stanley has some thoughts on that too, right?
Oh yeah. Whether it's scripture or another important text, he warns against simply reading it word for word or over-explaining. It's about bringing it to life, not just dissecting it.
Don't treat it like a textbook, treat it like a story.
He suggests things like highlighting unusual words, voicing your own questions, and of course using visuals. Remember that slingshot? It's about creating an immersive experience.
I love that, drawing people into the story and helping them see it in a new way.
And then finally, he reminds us to be authentic. It's great to improve our communication, but not at the expense of our own voice and personality.
So it's about that balance, right? Staying true to yourself, but also being open to improving how you communicate. Authenticity shines through when you're passionate about what you're talking about.
Exactly. In fact, he tells a great story about helping a fellow communicator refine how he approached scripture, and it led to a much more engaging and impactful delivery.
That's encouraging. Shows that we can all benefit from these ideas. There's always room for growth, no matter how much experience we have.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, the most important thing is remembering why we're communicating in the first place. It's about connecting, inspiring, making a difference.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So to wrap up, what's that final takeaway Stanley leaves us with?
He leaves us with a really powerful question. What if there was a guaranteed formula for doubling your audience and income just by doing these 4 things? Would you try it? Even if it meant stepping outside your comfort zone.
Wow. That's a question that really makes you think, right? It challenges us to consider what we might change to be better communicators.
Yeah, and it reminds us that there's always room for growth.
Yeah.
This isn't about becoming someone we're not. It's about being even better versions of ourselves.
So for you listening, what does all of this mean? You've gone on this deep dive with us. How can you put this into practice?
It means, honestly, You have the potential to really connect with people when you speak. You can inspire them to take action. You don't have to settle for being boring or confusing or forgettable.
It means crafting messages that are clear, engaging, memorable. Talking to one person, 100 people, these principles still apply.
And it means you can make a real difference. Your words have power.
Hmm.
And you can use these tools, these principles, to create something positive.
So, are you ready to communicate for a change?
The tools are there, the principles are there. Now it's about taking that step, even if it's outside your comfort zone a little. And we'll be right here cheering you on.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into communicating for a change. We've covered so many great insights from Andy Stanley today. Don't forget to check out the show notes for links, summaries, and all the resources we mentioned.
And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the world of communication and personal growth.
Until next time, keep those conversations flowing, and remember, your voice matters.